Welcome to Texas Rye Whiskey Studies by Stab the Dragon Productions for our National Rye Whiskey Tournament. Coming to you from Fort Worth, Texas on August 2nd, 2025, where it is a pleasant 93 degrees. We are studying somewhere between 30 to 40 ryes to see which ones I like the most. I do a review and analysis of each whiskey individually, and then we have two go head-to-head to determine a winner for that match and then progress on up in the tournament. Last time we looked at Canadian Club 100% Rye, and tonight we're going to study one of its cousins, Jim Beam Rye, white label, 80 proof. Just the facts. Suntory owns Jim Beam and Canadian Club, along with Alberta Premium and Basil Hayden Dark Rye. So those are the first four in this series, and they're all related. Jim Beam Rye, white label, is 40% ABV or 80 proof, with some contradictory evidence on the secretive mash bill. I paid $15.78 for this bottle in November of 2024, and it is readily available at all three of the big box stores I shop at here in Fort Worth. Tasting notes. It has kind of the standard Jim Beam flavor up front. You can tell the relationship there. It is sweet, but then the spiciness kicks in as well. It's got some wood, leather, and tobacco notes that I really love. Caramel, baking spices, and then some rye spice on the back end finally. I do really like this rye. It's got those wood notes that I love, but it's just too thin, faint, and underproof. My score for this whiskey was an 80. Letter grade for drinkability, a solid B. Recommendation. This rye whiskey, like its bourbon brother, offers nice flavors, but it's weak, faint, like it promises something that it cannot deliver. So what is this whiskey good for? This rye would serve admirably as an entry-level rye for someone who likes lower proof whiskeys and has never had a rye before because it's so bourbon forward. It's smooth and inoffensive. It's got good flavors. It serves well as a cocktail. And so, this would be a great step up from the bourbon world into the rye world. This whiskey would serve as a great bridge. Let's get into the details now. History. I am not here going to recite the history of Jim Beam. I have done a couple of book reviews on my channels that cover all that. Instead, I'll focus on the history of Jim Beam Rye as well as I can, but this is mysterious. In one source, it is stated that in 1938, Jim Beam released their first rye whiskey, a drier, spicier version of their bourbon. But one source I saw stated that the rye was remixed and rebranded in 2015. And this was followed up in 2016 with the release of the 90 proof pre-prohibition rye in the green label. The book, The Spirit of Rye, which is a wonderful resource that I do recommend, did not give us the history of Jim Beam Rye as much as a history of Jim Beam bourbons. On page 256, it gives a very brief statement on the pre-prohibition rye, and it even gets that wrong. Quote, "This is the company's entry into the rye market," and discusses the pre-prohibition bottle. So that's a little bit disappointing. And that's a big beefy book, that's for sure. Also, Fred Noe's book, Beam Straight Up. Where's that one? Right here. Fred Noe doesn't really include much about the rye either. He does have a chart of the Beam family master distillers and what their major contributions were. And under his great uncle T. Jeremiah Beam, he lists on page 153, Jim Beam Rye was his contribution. So that would have been, there's no date affixed there, but that probably would have been in the 50s. Uncle Jerry, as they called him, took over the day-to-day operations from Jim Beam, his brother, in 1944. Then in American Still Life, here, the Jim Beam story by F. Paul Picoult, there is similarly nothing about the origins of Jim Beam rye. So the more I go down this rabbit trail of rye history, the more frustrating it becomes. So for that reason, only 3 out of 5 points for history. Let's look at the bottle, label, and marketing. I've got the rounded square bottle. So you can see it's square, but rounded corners up here. It's got a flared curvy neck with some grooves in it. This bottle is typical for Jim Beam products. The bottle and label are really pretty nice. The green neck and cap there, and then the green on the label there indicates rye. And that's not a legal requirement. It's more of a traditional thing. Jim Beam is ubiquitous and has been a part of the whiskey conversation for well over 100 years. But advertising for this whiskey for rye, not so much. Rye is now just a tiny part of the whiskey world, and it used to be the #1 component of the whiskey world 200 years ago. So there's just not much advertising for rye. And when I searched for advertisements for this 80 proof rye on YouTube, I found none. Zero. Zip. Nada. Yet. I did find one advertisement for the 90 proof pre-prohibition rye. Similarly, I only found one review of this white label rye, but several for the green label pre-prohibition 90 proof rye. So despite the great price and the high availability of this whiskey, there's no advertisements and no reviews out there. 4 out of 5 points for bottle, label, and marketing. This is always placed well in the stores in the Jim Beam section of the stores, and it is a section. Composition. This is a Kentucky rye. I've seen it labeled that by people, which means it's very possibly 51% rye and then mostly corn and a small amount of barley. However, that book, The Spirit of Rye, says the pre-prohibition 90 proof has a mash bill of 55% rye, 35% corn, and 10% barley. I kind of doubt that, but it's possible. But the rye content on here does not taste like 55%. I'm thinking 51. The book does not discuss this white label or any other earlier editions of Jim Beam rye in the 20th century. At 80 proof and probably about 4 years old, there's just nothing definite here about a mash bill. But I'm going to say the 51% is a good guess. And I did see it mentioned that way in a review that I read. You know, there's not any video reviews, but there are some in-print reviews. The label here does include a calorie count as 97 calories in a serving. It says calories 97. So there you go. That's interesting. Maybe that's on other bottles of whiskey and I've just missed that, but it's the first time I've ever remember seeing it. So again, though, the similarities to the Jim Beam bourbon in this bottle are very notable. You can tell they're brothers. So for composition, 12 out of 15 points. Appearance. Well, if you look in the bottle, this looks fairly dark compared with the Jim Beam bourbon. Let me see if I can hold this up so you can see it. See, in the bottles, that looks pretty different. You know, this is very light, this is darker. However, when I hold up the glasses, here's the rye, here's the bourbon. There's not much difference between the two. Yeah, the rye might be just a tiny shade darker, maybe so. So appearance, copper amber, a little bit light. 3 out of 5 points. Nosing. Does have a sweet nose. Corn, there again, I'm thinking this is very high corn. Bourbony nose. If I was just to smell this, I would think it might be a high rye bourbon. Very pleasant, spicy. There's a little bit of spice there. Some wood. I think maybe the leather notes or tobacco are seeping through. So really, and my nose is terrible with whiskeys. There's a lot of bourbons I can't smell at all. Usually I have better luck with ryes and scotches. So this nose is pleasant, so I'm going to give it 8 out of 10 points. My normal standard score is a 7 for something I can't smell. Let's go with the taste. The website says, bold taste, spicy flavor, marked by warm notes, a spicy kick and a bite of black pepper, all rounded out by hints of vanilla and oak. Well, for me, yeah, bold, spicy, warm, definitely, spicy, kick. Black pepper, not so sure about that. Vanilla, I rarely get vanilla in whiskeys, only rarely. Oak, definitely, and how that oak comes across to me is tobacco, leather, wood, maybe even coffee a little bit. So this is amongst my favorite types of ryes. I really like those wood notes, definitely. Now, this has kind of a standard Jim Beam flavor right up front. If I was given, I need to do this, I need to do a blind tasting between this and the bourbon. See if I could even tell the difference. They're that close, at least to me. So it's got that standard Jim Beam flavor up front. You recognize it. But then the spiciness and the wood notes kick in the leather, tobacco. And that gives you just a hint that maybe this is the rye. Little tiny bit of rye spice on the back end. So I really like this rye. It's got the wood notes I love, but it's underproofed and it's just too faint. 22 points for taste. The mouthfeel, burn, and finish. Again, the rye has good flavor, but it's just too thin, which means those flavors are suggestions or hints. And like its big brother, Jim Beam Bourbon, it's thin at 80 proof. The positive effect, though, is almost no burn. Now, I like a good burn. I like a whiskey that's got a bold burn. This has just a little bit, and if you drink it right, you can get a burn up in your sinuses, but most of the time it's just in the mouth, a tingle. It's nothing really going down. So to me, it's a very smooth, gentle whiskey. I tend to prefer bolder, stronger burns. The finish does bring out the rye flavor a little bit on that back end. So it does have a nice flavor in the finish, but it's still weak and comes up a bit short. So 12 out of 15 for mouthfeel, burn, and finish. Now, neat or mixer. I do like it neat, but again, with the weakness problem. I rarely put whiskey on ice, and this would definitely just weaken it way too much for me at 80 proof. But I did try this in a cocktail. Yesterday, I was using Sprite, a lemon slice, and ice, and 1 shot of Jim Beam rye, and it really came out pretty good. It was a very hot day. My wife even liked it, so that was impressive, because she's really not a whiskey girl. So let me make an old-fashioned and come back and discuss it. Okay, I am back with an old fashioned in my hand, and this I used about 2 ounces of Jim Beam. We've got 2 Luxardo cherries in there, an orange peel, a cup, about 3 dashes of bitters. I use, for a whiskey like this, I use maple syrup as the sweetener. All right, let's see how this works. And that is pretty good. Yeah, maple syrup kind of dominates. Again, the whiskey may be getting a little bit lost in there. Let me add a touch more. That's pretty good, but I think I've just got too much maple syrup in there. And again, the whiskey just kind of, it's so weak. But it really did make, with the Sprite yesterday, and lemon. I had a slice of lemon in the Sprite. That one actually worked better than this old fashioned did. So that maybe my skill level with old fashions just failed right here. It's got too much sweet going on. But Neater Mixer, I'm going to say 4 points out of 5. Price, value, and availability. Goody Goody had this in Fort Worth at $15.78. Total Wine $14.99. Specs $15.78. And these are great prices for a whiskey that tastes good, but it is just kind of under strength. It's an introductory whiskey. And so that drives the value down just a bit. Great availability though, so 9 out of 10 points for price, value, and availability. Bonus points. I really do like the flavors here, but the proof is just too low to love this. Decent looking bottle and label. You know, it's got a rich history, you know, a classic looking label, classic looking bottle. Rich history behind the brand. So 3 points out of 5 for bonus, giving me a total score of 80. A letter grade for drinkability is a solid B. Now let's do a special guest. The special guest is Jim Beam Bourbon, right there. And what I want to do is see how close these 2 whiskeys are. Now, I'm not going to mix these up, although maybe I should. I'll do that another time. There's the Jim Beam. Here's the rye. So let me start with the rye. And now we do the Jim Beam Bourbon. I'm telling you, if I did this blind, I don't know that I could tell the difference. They are very similar, very close. Another reason why I think that the rye here is probably a 51% rye. You know, that book that said 55%, I'm not believing it. And there's no official releasing. You know, I go to this one website that gives mash bills of all the whiskeys, and it said blank. It had nothing. Okay. So my analysis, you know, it's just weak. Good flavors all the way around. What is it good for? Again, it serves admirably as an entry-level rye for somebody who likes low-proof whiskeys. Has never had a rye before. They're coming from the bourbon world. You know, you want to try a rye? Well, I don't know. This would be a good one if they like Jim Beam. Smooth and inoffensive, good flavors, but a little bit weak. Serves well as a cocktail. This is again, a very bourbon-forward rye. So, am I glad I purchased this bottle? This is my second bottle of this. Yeah, but I only bought it for this National Rye Tournament because I'd had it before. And then I had the green bottle, the 90 proof bottle, and that was fantastic. Well, so now I've got this one, and I found one more of the green bottle. But guess what? That green bottle is going away. Most stores aren't carrying it anymore, and the website at Jim Beam doesn't have it. It's got this one. So the 90 proof rye, which is superior in every way, is going away. That's sad. All right, next up, Monday the 4th of August, I hope to celebrate the birthday of the United States Coast Guard. And to do such, I've got Gulf of America bourbon coming from Cincinnati Distilling. I'm going to discuss the history of the Coast Guard a bit, and that'll be Monday the 4th for the Coast Guard's birthday. But later that week, I will do the head-to-head competition between these two. Canadian Club 100% rye and Jim Beam rye. So again, these are going to be very similar. There's a similarity in flavors here that's unmistakable as well. So that may be a tough match. So that might be a week from now, like August 9th. All right, well, this is Stab the Dragon Productions and Texas Rye Whiskey Studies out here.